Hello, this is the last lecture already. A reminder first that your bibliography for your final is due August 1st, giving you about a week to write it. Let me know if you have any questions. Keep up the good work. I believe I have final subjects for almost all of you, but make sure I do have it if you haven't sent it to me yet. This lecture will focus on West Side Story. We'll talk a little bit about The Sound of Music, Chicago, and Hamilton. And we'll track several directions that American musicals have taken since the most popular days of the 1950s. I very much appreciated our discussions about Oklahoma, especially, and then Hair and the form shifts that rock and roll brought to the musical. With The West Side Story and Chicago, especially, we have representations of musicals that focus a lot of song and dance as art forms themselves, and also stories about America and American culture that are dark and cynical in ways that move the form closer to something like tragedy, with West Side Story, or high parody, like Chicago. The influence of popular culture and media also play a role in this shift. But let's actually begin with The Sound of Music, which I have not included on the syllabus, but I'm assuming many of you are familiar with. While Oklahoma might be the theater historian's choice for the American musical, the ubiquity of The Sound of Music has made it arguably the most well-known example of the American musical in the world. As Rodgers and Hammerstein's last collaboration before Hammerstein's death, it also serves as a kind of bookend of a period of the book musical in the form that Hammerstein began with Showboat and perfected in the 1940s and 1950s. Why do you think The Sound of Music has had such cultural traction? Part of it is clearly that the bad guys are definitely bad guys. Nazis are about as bad as they get. But the picture of a society struggling to avoid the power and militarism of the Nazis was also a strong message in the midst of the Cold War. The ideological dislike of a movement doesn't necessarily help much if that movement has power and a strong army. So it serves as a metaphor for the Cold War, but also a more universal rejection of evil, even when, or especially when, it encroaches on the ideal of family. What else does The Sound of Music have? Lots of kids, which always makes for empathy, but also provides lots of opportunities for production in community and educational theater. Great music, obviously, and a simplicity and beauty of setting. Not too many difficult dancing or singing sequences, which, if you think about it, make certain pieces, like West Side Story or Chicago, harder to do well for many groups. I played the captain in middle school. I will not sing Edelweiss here, but I would imagine that many of you have seen a production of The Sound of Music somewhere in your life, and probably not necessarily in a high-level professional production. So what else? Why is it around? It's still shown on TV near Christmas every year, and at least for my generation and older, that meant we likely saw it regularly. And what is American about The Sound of Music? Is it wish fulfillment about our role in World War II? How would that work? West Side Story is much more clearly about America. It's got a song called America, for crying out loud. And the opening shots of the film, those beautiful shots of New York City, focusing finally on the blocks that West Side Story takes place on. It's about what it means to be American, but it takes it down to the most basic level of family, or, to refer back to Hair, tribe. And the same kind of movement in the film of Movement to a Spot in New York City, from Claude in the Country to the bus, to the shots of New York City to Central Park. There is also the idea that New York City is America, again an echo of Hair, in which Berger actually says to Claude in the film, "Welcome to America," despite the fact that the film begins with Claude coming from Americana American, somewhere in the Midwest. This idea is obviously an interesting one in terms of the musical, always centered in New York City, but representing other places. New York City is still the center of the musical universe, and is often the center of the universe in musicals as well. This goes back to some degree to those original book musicals and musical films based around the idea of a backstage story, going all the way back to The Jazz Singer. The Broadway dream as the American dream, not of a white picket fence, but of celebrity and riches and stardom. Think of Chicago, which, while in a different city, and its vision of America filled with a city mentality, not a country one. How is America represented in West Side Story? In terms of race, in terms of class, in terms of gender. It's an adaptation of Romeo and Juliet, as I'm sure you know. How does that work? And what is different in West Side Story than Romeo and Juliet? How is the focus on dance in West Side Story different than other musicals we've looked at? We are treated to lots of extended dances without text or dialogue, and lots of action happens in dance only. Rodgers and Hammerstein, with the exception of Laurie's Dream, which in the film is an incredible sequence, keep the song as the exposition, with the dance as a part of that. With Jerome Robbins' choreography and Leonard Bernstein's music, West Side Story is balletic and uses dance as a major part of the storytelling. Think of the opening sequence again, where the entire background and atmosphere is told through an amazing dance fight chase sequence, with almost no dialogue except the occasional jets. Finally, Chicago, which in many ways takes us full circle, from the jazz singer to the jazz killer, or jazz killers. But the same questions are asked and interrogated in different ways, and the backdrop of meta-performance, set in the world of performance itself, the setting of the world of entertainment and media, allows for lots of performances that still, sort of, meet the standards of a kind of realism. The same is true of other musicals in this period and form, like Cabaret, or Chorus Line, for example. How does the use of performance within a performance work? It allows for song and dance, makes an excuse for it, again, just like in The Jazz Singer, thus getting away from the original aesthetic issue of the musical form, that the artifice of song in the musical helps it reach a stronger emotional reality. And perhaps this partly explains the cynicism and darker perspective of these works. Other things to note: cops and courts don't get a good showing in most of these musicals. A question worth thinking about. Okay, Hamilton. Last but certainly not least. I hope you've had a chance to listen to the music in its entirety, and maybe even watch a clip here and there of videos on YouTube. But with Hamilton, I'd like you to think about the way that it infuses different cultures into its historical context, how it mixes musical styles, and how it aggressively casts against historical ideas of race. In terms of style, people call it a hip-hop musical, but of course, if you listen to the music, it's not just hip-hop. There are many, many different musical influences and styles that occurred during the musical. What does Hamilton tell us about America? How does it change our ideas about what it is to be American? And what does its immense artistic and audience popularity say about where we are now as a nation? As we ramp up to a presidential election this fall, how does Hamilton speak to the various politics that we are seeing and reading about every day? It's a lot to think about, I hope, and I hope you'll find it interesting, and I'm looking forward to your discussions of these issues. So all that is left after this week is your final. Make sure I have your bibliography and you're working on it. It really has been a pleasure. I've loved the discussions and I'm glad we got to do the course this summer. Make sure to continue them this week and next.